You think you can just waltz back into our lives with empty promises and a guilty conscience? The words spilled out of my mouth before I could stop them, my voice laced with years of pent-up resentment. I watched as my husband Declan flinched at my accusation, his carefully crafted facade cracking ever so slightly. For a moment, the man I'd once loved stood before me, exposed and vulnerable, a stark contrast to the charming, successful marketing executive he portrayed to the world. "Thea, please, let me explain," he pleaded, his eyes darting around our modest suburban home, as if searching for an escape. I crossed my arms, steeling myself against the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "Explain what, Declan? That you've been lying to me all this time? That you've been leading a double life?" The words hung in the air, the weight of their truth bearing down on us both. I couldn't help but wonder how long this had been going on, how many times Declan had betrayed my trust. My gaze drifted to our son Finn, who stood silently by my side, his hazel eyes narrowed with a wisdom and maturity far beyond his 15 years. The pain and confusion etched on his face made my heart clench. This wasn't how it was supposed to be, our little family, torn apart by Declan's selfish actions. "Mom, what's going on?" Finn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is he talking about?" I hesitated, not wanting to burden my son with the ugliness of his father's transgressions. But Finn deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. "Your father has been—" I paused, struggling to find the right words. "He's been keeping secrets from us, Finn, secrets that are going to change our lives, whether we're ready or not." Declan took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Thea, please, let's not involve Finn in this. This is between you and me." I let out a humorless laugh. "Between you and me? Don't you think Finn has a right to know what kind of man you really are?" I turned to my son, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Finn, your father has been having an affair. He's been living a double life, betraying our family." Finn's eyes widened, his expression a mix of shock and betrayal. "An affair? But how could you, Dad?" He shook his head, his voice trembling with emotion. "How could you do this to us?" Declan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For once, the silver-tongued charmer was at a loss for words. I took a step closer to Finn, wrapping my arm around him protectively. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Finn, but I promise you we're going to get through this, together." Finn nodded, his jaw set with a determination that belied his age. "What are we going to do, Mom?" I took a deep breath, my gaze unwavering as I stared down my husband. "We're going to fight. Declan's betrayal isn't just about me. It's about our family, our future, and I won't let him destroy everything we've built without a fight." Declan opened his mouth, but I raised my hand, silencing him. "Save it, Declan. The time for excuses and empty promises is over. Now it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions." The air was thick with tension as we stood there, 3 lives irrevocably changed by the unraveling of Declan's web of lies. But in that moment, I knew that Finn and I would emerge stronger, our bond forged in the crucible of adversity. This was our fight, and we were ready to win. The next few days were a blur of fury and determination. After Declan's botched attempt to smooth things over, I knew I couldn't trust him anymore. There was only one thing left to do: uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. So, with Finn's help, I started digging. We followed Declan's movements, tracking his comings and goings, piecing together the fragments of his double life. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon a clue that would change everything. One evening, as Declan was leaving for another late night at the office, Finn and I decided to follow him. We trailed his car through the city streets, our hearts pounding in anticipation and dread. Finally, Declan pulled into an upscale apartment complex, one I didn't recognize. "This is it, Mom," Finn whispered, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Let's see what he's hiding." We waited, hidden in the shadows, as Declan let himself into the building. Minutes later, a young woman emerged, her blonde hair and designer clothes a stark contrast to the modest suburban housewife I had become. "Who is she?" Finn asked, his voice laced with anger. I shook my head, my own fury building. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." We watched as the woman entered Declan's car, and the two of them drove off together. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. Betrayal, rage, and a twinge of heartbreak swirled within me. each emotion fueling my determination to uncover the full extent of Declan's deception. "We need to get inside that apartment," I said, my gaze locked on the building. Finn nodded, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "I'm with you, Mom." We made our way to the apartment, and with a bit of lock-picking skill that Finn had picked up from a friend, we were inside. The place was immaculate, clearly maintained by someone with Declan's refined tastes. But it was the personal touches that made my blood boil. Framed photos of the woman, her belongings scattered throughout the space. "He's been living a double life," I murmured, the reality of the situation sinking in. "All this time, he's been deceiving us, betraying our family." Finn's jaw was clenched, his eyes burning with a righteous fury. "What are we going to do, Mom?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing with possibilities. "We're going to expose him, Finn. We're going to bring his whole world crashing down around him." "How?" Finn asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I turned to him, a grim determination etched on my face. "We're going to plant the seeds of his downfall. We're going to use his own deceit against him, and we're going to make sure he pays for what he's done." Finn nodded, his expression mirroring my own. "I'm with you, Mom. Whatever it takes." We left the apartment. The evidence of Declan's infidelity burned into our minds. The drive home was silent, the weight of our newfound knowledge heavy upon our shoulders. But I knew that this was only the beginning. Declan's betrayal would not go unanswered, and I would stop at nothing to ensure that he faced the consequences of his actions. As we pulled into our driveway, I turned to Finn, my eyes meeting his. "Get ready, Finn. The storm is coming, and we're going to be the ones to weather it." The walls of our home seemed to close in on me as Finn and I returned from our investigation. The reality of Declan's betrayal weighed heavily, a dark cloud that threatened to consume us both. Finn was the first to break the silence. "Mom, what are we going to do?" I could hear the trepidation in his voice, the fear that his family was falling apart. He was just a child, yet he was forced to grapple with the ugly truth of his father's deception. "We're going to fight back," I said, my own voice steady and resolute. "Declan needs to be held accountable for what he's done." Finn's eyes widened, a flicker of hope sparking within them. "How? What's the plan?" I paused, weighing my words carefully. "We're going to use his own lies against him. We're going to expose his affair and the embezzlement at his company." Finn's brow furrowed. "Embezzlement? You think he's been stealing from his company?" I nodded grimly. "It's the only explanation for the lavish apartment and the way he's been living. Declan's always been good with numbers, and it wouldn't be hard for him to siphon off funds." Finn's expression shifted, the innocence of youth replaced by a steely determination. "Okay, what do we do?" I placed a hand on his shoulder, meeting his gaze. "Finn, this isn't going to be easy. What we're about to do could have serious consequences. Are you sure you're ready for this?" He didn't hesitate. "I'm with you, Mom, whatever it takes." I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at his unwavering loyalty. Declan had betrayed us, but Finn and I would stand united, no matter the cost. "All right, here's what we're going to do." Over the next few days, Finn and I worked tirelessly, piecing together the evidence against Declan. We scoured his financial records, meticulously documenting the discrepancies and misappropriated funds. Alongside that, we set the stage for exposing his affair, planting breadcrumbs that would lead directly to his mistress. It was a delicate dance, one that required patience and precision. Finn proved to be an invaluable partner, his sharp mind and keen observation skills complementing my own. Together, we wove a web of deceit that would ensnare Declan, leaving him no choice but to face the consequences of his actions. As the final pieces fell into place, Finn and I stood in our living room, surveying the evidence before us. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Finn asked, his eyes reflecting the weight of what we were about to do. I nodded, my resolve unwavering. Declan needs to pay for what he's done. This is the only way to ensure our family's future. Finn took a deep breath and then squared his shoulders. "Okay, let's do this." With a few clicks of the mouse, the incriminating information was sent out into the world. Anonymous tips that would unleash the storm upon Declan's carefully constructed facade. In the quiet that followed, Finn and I stood together, our hands clasped tightly. We had taken the first step, and now the dominoes were set to fall. Whatever happened next, we would face it as a united front, mother and son, determined to reclaim our lives from the ashes of Declan's betrayal. The days that followed were filled with a tense anticipation as Finn and I waited for the dominoes to fall. We knew that it was only a matter of time before Declan's world came crashing down around him, and we were both equal parts terrified and resolute. The first signs of the impending chaos came when Declan started acting strangely. He was distracted, his usual charm and confidence replaced by an underlying anxiety. I watched him, feigning ignorance as he made frantic phone calls and retreated to his study for hours on end. "Something's wrong," Finn whispered one evening as we sat in the living room pretending to watch TV. "Do you think he knows?" I placed a comforting hand on his arm. "If he does, he hasn't confronted us yet, but we need to be prepared for when he does." Finn nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What's the next step?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. We need to plant the final piece of evidence, something that will irrevocably link Declan to the embezzlement and his affair. Finn's eyes widened, but he didn't flinch. "What do you have in mind?" "I've set up a false paper trail," I explained, my voice low and steady. "Documents that will implicate Declan in the embezzlement, with his mistress as the motive." Finn's expression shifted, a glimmer of unease crossing his features. "Mom, are you sure about this? I mean, we're essentially framing him." I reached out and squeezed his hand, my gaze unwavering. "I know, Finn, but Declan has left us no choice. He destroyed our family, and now he has to face the consequences." Finn nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Okay, let's do it." Together, we carefully planted the evidence, ensuring that it would be discovered at the most opportune moment. As we finished, a sense of finality settled over us, the weight of our actions palpable. "It's done," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Finn looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "What now?" I pulled him into a tight hug, my own emotions threatening to spill over. "Now we wait, and when the time is right, we'll be there to watch Declan fall." The next few days were a blur of tension and anxiety. Declan's behavior grew more erratic, and I could see the strain taking its toll on him. Finn and I kept our heads down, acting as if nothing was amiss, but the anticipation was palpable. Then, the moment we had been waiting for arrived. Declan burst through the front door, his face contorted with rage and panic. "What the hell have you done?" he shouted, his eyes wild. I stood my ground, my expression calm and collected. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Declan." "Don't give me that crap, Thea," he spat, his hands trembling. "I know you're behind this. The company is investigating me, and they've found evidence of embezzlement, and—" He trailed off, the color draining from his face as he realized the full extent of his downfall. "And your affair," I finished, my voice laced with a quiet triumph. "Looks like the walls are closing in, Declan." Declan stared at me, his mouth agape, unable to form a coherent response. In that moment, I saw the man I had once loved for who he truly was, a coward, a liar, and a betrayer. Finn stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "You brought this on yourself, Dad. Now you have to face the consequences." Declan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He turned and fled, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the house, a fitting symphony to the crumbling of his carefully constructed life. As the door slammed shut, Finn and I stood together, our eyes meeting in a silent understanding. The first phase of our plan was complete, and now the final act was about to unfold. The days that followed Declan's confrontation were charged with a tense and uneasy silence. Finn and I knew that the final act was about to unfold, and we steeled ourselves for the inevitable fallout. Declan, for his part, had become a shadow of his former self. Gone was the confident, charismatic man I had once loved. In his place was a desperate, cowering figure, constantly looking over his shoulder. I could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. One evening, as Finn and I sat in the living room, the sound of Declan's car pulling into the driveway sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I turned to Finn, my gaze unwavering. "It's time," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Finn nodded, his expression resolute. We moved to the front window, watching as Declan hurried up the path, his movements frantic and erratic. The front door burst open, and Declan stumbled inside, his eyes wild and his face twisted with anguish. "Thea! Finn!" he cried, his voice cracking with desperation. What have you done? I stepped forward, my arms crossed over my chest. What are you talking about, Declan? Don't play dumb with me, he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. The company knows about the embezzlement. They know about Elise. Finn tensed beside me, his jaw clenched tight. So your little affair has finally caught up with you, huh, Dad? Declan's gaze snapped to our son, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and fury. You two? You did this, didn't you? How could you? I held up a hand, silencing him. We did what we had to do, Declan. You brought this on yourself. But I'm your husband, he bellowed, his voice echoing through the house. How could you do this to me? You lost the right to be our husband and father the moment you betrayed us, I said, my voice steady and unwavering. You destroyed our family, Declan. Now you have to face the consequences. Declan's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, his head cradled in his hands. Please, Thea, Finn, you have to help me. I can't lose everything. Finn stepped forward, his expression hardening. You should have thought about that before you started lying and cheating. Now it's too late. Declan looked up at us, his eyes pleading. I'll do anything. Please, just help me. I shook my head, my heart hardening against the man I once loved. It's too late for that, Declan. The die has been cast. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made us all freeze. Declan's face paled, and he scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting around the room in a desperate search for an escape. That's her, he whispered, his voice trembling. Elise. I watched as the front door opened, and a young woman stepped inside, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. Declan, what's going on? She asked, her gaze sweeping over the scene before her. Declan moved towards her, his hands outstretched. Elise, you have to help me. Thea and Finn, they've... But before he could finish, a barrage of text messages and emails began to flood Elise's phone. She looked down, her eyes widening as she read the messages, her expression shifting from confusion to fury. Declan, what is this? She demanded, her voice rising in pitch. Embezzlement? Affair? Declan's face crumpled, and he reached for her, but Elise recoiled, slapping him across the face. You lied to me, she spat, her eyes brimming with tears. All this time you were using me. Declan cowered, his once proud demeanor shattered. Elise, please, I can explain. But Elise was already turning towards the door, her steps quickening with each passing moment. It's over, Declan, she called out, her voice thick with disgust. I want nothing to do with you. And with that, she was gone, leaving Declan alone, his world collapsing around him. Finn and I watched, our expressions stoic, as the final dominoes fell, and Declan's reckoning had arrived. The fallout from Declan's downfall was swift and unforgiving. In the days following the confrontation at our home, the evidence we had so meticulously planted began to surface, sending shockwaves through his company and personal life. Finn and I watched with a mixture of triumph and unease as the revelations unfolded. Declan's embezzlement scheme had been uncovered, with a paper trail leading directly back to him. His affair with the younger colleague Elise had also been exposed. Her angry tirades and accusations splashed across social media for all to see. The company's executives were swift to act, convening an emergency board meeting to discuss the shocking allegations against their star marketing executive. Finn and I positioned ourselves strategically, ensuring we would have a front-row seat to Declan's downfall. As the meeting commenced, the tension in the room was palpable. Declan, once the picture of confidence and control, sat hunched in his chair, his eyes darting around the room in a futile search for a way out. Mr. Langston, the CEO began, his voice grave, we've received some disturbing information regarding your conduct at the company. Allegations of embezzlement and an inappropriate relationship with a colleague. Do you have any explanation for these serious charges? Declan's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. He was trapped, his carefully constructed facade crumbling before our very eyes. I don't know what to say, he stammered, his usual eloquence deserting him. The CEO's expression hardened. Perhaps you'd like to explain the substantial transfers of company funds into a personal account, or the considerable sums spent on lavish gifts and trips for this colleague of yours. Declan swallowed hard, his face pale and drawn. I can explain. It's not what it seems. I was just trying to. Save it, Declan, the CEO interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. The evidence against you is overwhelming. You've betrayed the trust of this company and your family. As of this moment, you are terminated from your position, and we will be pursuing legal action against you." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices, executives shouting and demanding answers, the sound of Declan's world crashing down around him. Finn gripped my hand, his eyes shining with a mixture of relief and vindication. "It's happening, Mom. He's getting what he deserves." I squeezed his hand, my own expression grim. "Yes, Finn, but this is only the beginning." As the meeting descended into chaos, I scanned the room, searching for any sign of Elise. It wasn't long before I spotted her, her face a mask of fury and betrayal. Declan caught sight of her, his eyes widening in panic. Elise, please, you have to help me. You know I love you. We can—" But Elise cut him off, slapping him hard across the face. "How dare you, Declan? You used me, lied to me, and now you expect me to help you. You're pathetic." Declan recoiled, his hand clutching his reddened cheek. "Elise, please. I can make this right. We can—" "There is no we, Declan," Elise spat, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're done. I want nothing more to do with you or your twisted little family." With that, Elise turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, leaving Declan to face the consequences of his actions alone. As the executives continued to berate and interrogate Declan, Finn and I watched in silence, our plan unfolding flawlessly. The dominoes were falling one by one, and Declan's world was crumbling around him. In that moment, I knew that our long-awaited revenge was at hand. Declan had betrayed us, and now he would pay the price. The echoes of his betrayal would reverberate through his life, a haunting reminder of the consequences of his actions. The days that followed Declan's public downfall were a whirlwind of chaos and upheaval. As the investigation into his embezzlement and affair deepened, the once respected marketing executive found himself stripped of his job, his reputation, and the life he had so carefully crafted. Finn and I watched from the sidelines, our expressions a mix of grim satisfaction and a hint of unease. We had engineered Declan's downfall, but the weight of our actions still lingered, a constant reminder of the difficult choices we had been forced to make. The news of Declan's transgressions spread like wildfire, splashed across headlines and social media. His colleagues, once admirers of his success, now turned on him with a vengeance, their disgust and outrage palpable. The company he had worked for unceremoniously severed all ties, leaving him to face the legal consequences of his actions alone. One afternoon, as Finn and I sat in our living room, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a distraught Elise, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Thea, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "Elise, what are you doing here?" She pushed past me, her gaze wild and erratic. "I can't believe this is happening. Declan, he's ruined everything." Finn appeared at my side, his expression wary. "What do you want, Elise?" Elise whirled around, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and desperation. "I want to know why you did this. Why did you destroy Declan's life?" I held up a hand, my voice calm and measured. "Elise, Declan brought this upon himself. He betrayed our family, and we had to take action." "But I loved him," Elise cried, her hands clenching into fists. "I thought we had something real. How could he do this to me?" Finn stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Declan was using you, Elise. He's been lying and cheating his whole life. You were just one of his victims." Elise shook her head, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I can't believe it. All this time I thought he was the one. And now—" She trailed off, a sob escaping her lips. I reached out, placing a hand on her arm. "I'm sorry, Elise. I know this is difficult, but Declan's actions have consequences. You deserve better than him." Elise looked up at me, her eyes glistening with tears. I don't know what to do. My life is in shambles because of him." Finn stepped forward, his voice soft but resolute. "You have to move on, Elise. Declan is going to face the full weight of the law for what he's done. You don't have to be a part of that." Elise nodded, her jaw clenching with determination. "You're right. I can't let him drag me down, too." She turned to the door, pausing for a moment. "Thank you, Thea. Finn, I hope you both can find a way to move on from this, too." With that, she was gone, leaving Finn and I alone once more. We stood in silence, the weight of our actions heavy on our shoulders. "Do you think she'll be okay, Mom?" Finn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I sighed, pulling him into a tight hug. I hope so, Finn. But right now we need to focus on rebuilding our own lives. Finn nodded, his arms tightening around me. What about Dad? What's going to happen to him? I felt a twinge of regret, but it was quickly overshadowed by a steely resolve. Declan will have to face the consequences of his actions, Finn. The authorities are already closing in on him. It's time for him to pay for what he's done. Finn's grip on me tightened, and I knew that, despite the difficulty of our situation, we would emerge stronger. Declan's betrayal had shattered our family, but Finn and I would rebuild, stronger and more resilient than ever before. In the aftermath of Declan's downfall, Finn and I found ourselves grappling with a range of emotions: relief, sadness, and a glimmer of hope for a brighter future. The dust had settled, and while the scars of his betrayal remained, we were determined to move forward and reclaim our lives. As the legal proceedings against Declan unfolded, the full extent of his misdeeds became public knowledge. The embezzlement charges were staggering, and his affair with Elise only added to the tarnish on his reputation. Declan, once a respected and influential figure, now found himself shunned by his former colleagues and facing the very real possibility of a lengthy prison sentence. Despite the gravity of the situation, Finn and I took solace in the knowledge that justice was being served. Declan would have to answer for his crimes, and we could finally begin to heal and rebuild our lives without the burden of his lies and deceit. As the weeks turned to months, I found myself reconnecting with old friends and colleagues, my dedication to my nursing career becoming a source of pride and purpose. The promotion I had been working towards for years finally materialized, and I reveled in the validation of my hard work and resilience. Finn, too, blossomed in the absence of Declan's toxic influence. He threw himself into his studies, his grades soaring as he set his sights on prestigious colleges and universities. The light in his eyes had returned, and I could see the weight of the world slowly lifting from his shoulders. One evening, as Finn and I sat in our living room enjoying a rare moment of peace, the doorbell rang. I tensed, half expecting to see Declan on the other side pleading for our forgiveness. But when I opened the door, I was greeted by an unfamiliar face, a stern-looking police officer. "Mrs. Langston?" the officer asked, his voice neutral. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yes, that's me. What can I do for you, officer?" "I'm afraid I have some news regarding your husband, Declan," he said, his expression unreadable. Finn appeared at my side, his eyes filled with trepidation. "What happened?" The officer cleared his throat, his gaze shifting between us. "Mr. Langston has been sentenced to 5 years in prison for his crimes. The embezzlement and affair charges were substantial, and the judge deemed him a flight risk." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, quickly followed by a twinge of sadness. Declan had brought this upon himself, but the finality of his punishment was still a difficult reality to accept. "I see," I said, my voice steady. "Thank you for informing us, officer." The officer nodded, a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "If you have any questions or need assistance, please don't hesitate to contact us." With that, he turned and left, and Finn and I were left alone once more. I placed a hand on his shoulder, meeting his gaze. "It's over, Finn," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Declan's finally going to pay for what he's done." Finn nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I'm glad, Mom. I'm glad we fought back. I'm glad we didn't let him get away with it." I pulled him into a tight hug, a weight lifted from my shoulders. "Me too, Finn. Me too." In the days and weeks that followed, Finn and I continued to rebuild our lives, each day bringing new challenges and opportunities. I secured the promotion I had worked so hard for, and Finn excelled in his studies, his sights set on the future. As we sat together on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace and resilience that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Declan's betrayal had shaken us, but it had also forged an unbreakable bond between Finn and me. We had weathered the storm, and now we were stronger for it. "You know, Finn," I said, my gaze fixed on the horizon, "I'm proud of you. Proud of us. We've come a long way, haven't we?" Finn reached over and squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with understanding. "Yeah, Mom, we have, and I'm glad we did it together." In that moment, I knew that our future was bright and that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, Finn and I would face them side by side, our bond stronger than ever before.